Okay, so a pretty quick comic review this time. I realized that while I have next week's video planned, I didn't have this week's video planned. I didn't realize I hadn't uploaded anything for this week until I realized, oh, I haven't uploaded anything since the 11th. My mistake. Let's rectify that mistake by reviewing some comics. Now this is the... You might see me review these again. Like I might do the same... I'm not going to be able to return these. It's not one of those things where, oh, I've returned this stack of books because of this reason. No, I'm going to be keeping the same amount of books until I go to the next time to the library. It's possible I don't. It's highly possible I don't. You never know. But it's possible. Actually, I just came up with a good idea is that I would return them because I'm going away on vacation next week. That's why I had to have next week's video pre-planned. So I'm still going by my once a week upload schedule. Sorry, just looked like the brightness was down there for a second. So I have my one video per week schedule. It still stays intact, so to speak. But I'll be away on vacation next week, and I want to make sure. I said the same thing over again, didn't I? But I wanted to make sure that, because I wasn't sure, as I was trying to say, I wasn't sure if I would have, like, a really comic book store up where I was going on vacation, or I had a real comics when I was on vacation, so I wanted to make sure I had something no matter what. Let's get on with it, because I said the same thing 4 times, basically. Zatanna, what's this one called actually? The Jewel of Gravesend is the most forgettable, bland, and just by the numbers DC Ink book that I've read thus far. Now, I have no real expectations at all when it comes to DC Ink books, besides having some mild, not enthusiasm, but some mild enjoyment out of these books. These are books that I find in the local library, and I'm like, you know what? Let's check it out. Why not? And they're not that long, but this one took me 2 days to read. Now, I didn't start it at 6 in the morning, and then I read it all that day, and the next I read nothing else. No, it was I read my books I wanted to read beforehand, then I jump on this one, and it was more, I started pretty late the first night. It put me to sleep, honestly. Then the next day, I finished it off. I almost want to say it took me 3 days. I think it did. But then I, of course, read the comics I wanted to read beforehand, and then I jumped back on this one. So it was more just 2 days, and like by definition, not actual acting days, not by hours. But still, it should not take me that long to read it, regardless. Hellboy is still pretty good. I don't know if the Hellboy that I think of was never the Hellboy that I actually read, or if I just have false, because I always think of this as being like really fast paced, and it would take me 10 minutes to read, and it was really interesting, investing, and all that shit. But I think I'm thinking of the most recent things that Mike Mignola has been involved with, like his Radio Spaceman, which I think you can read both issues of that in like 20 minutes. Again, that's both issues. Or if I'm thinking of, technically he didn't write this, it's just in the world of Hellboy, but it's sort of Hyperborea, another book you probably read in 40 minutes, and just 4 issues. But I don't know, but I still like it. But I still remember being not just fast paced, but not being as dialogue heavy in general. But time will tell if it's just the first few volumes that they're like this, and then it gets to what I remember it being or not. Revolver by Matt Kindt. Unfortunately, I think the only thing that I'm going to really enjoy by Matt Kindt is going to be Berserker. Because everything else that I've read by him, and there's not been a whole lot, besides Berserker, and again, even Berserker, it's just been the first 6 or so issues, hasn't really wowed me. And this is another one that hasn't really wowed me. It was definitely interesting. It definitely took me a lot less to read. It flowed a lot nicer than Zatanna did, and I read it all in one sitting. But there was several times throughout where I was like, I could just go to bed right now until I'll finish in the morning. But I stuck through it, I finished, and I'm glad I did. Once I didn't read the stupid shit at the bottom of the margins, that was like a newscast that if it was consistent, it would have been nice. but they keep cutting it off, and I get what they're going for, and I got the aesthetic, and once I got the aesthetic, I was like, there's no reason to read this jumble of words, so I'm going to just read the actual story. The story itself is pretty interesting, but I think it just kind of is an example of a first draft kind of story. Matt Kint just wanted to put something out for Vertigo, and then he put that one out. My other theory is that this is his first book. This came out in 2010, and it's most likely his first book, so it's a very, this was your first book kind of feel to it. And I have Department H, that's the other one I have, that I've not read yet. So that's another thing. The comic hall, no, not that. The library comics review, I go like, that's going to be a little while from now. Well, probably, so what I did this week, because I didn't want to, I explained this with next week's video, but I'll explain this again here, because it's, the video beforehand, so I might as well just explain it, I'm jumbling my words. Basically, instead of trying to be like, okay, so if I read 2 issues of Captain Marvel and 5 issues of Walking Dead, I will finish those both by then, but then I also want to mix in some Department H, and then I didn't want to do any of that bullshit, so I just decided, you know what, I'm going to bring all my library books with me. It's not 25, it's like 15, and those are, and a lot of them, like, this size anyways, so it wasn't going to be too hard on my back either way, and I was bringing 15 comics anyways, either way, so I was like, you know what, I'll bring those with me, and time will tell if I get to finish them by the time I get back home. Because usually I have no problem with it, because that's only because I have time in my hands. I don't think I will with vacation, depending on what we do. So that was that. But yeah, so I decided instead to get back on my floppies, because the comics that I own in floppy form, single issue form. And I'm glad I did, because I got to finally get down to some comics I've been putting off for so long, and then also reread comics I've been meaning to reread for a while now. And you'll get those reviews either way when I come back on vacation. Like a big little celebration of me being back in town. Sin City Volume 4, I believe. This has been such a delight to go back to. Now, it's not exactly a fun comic. It's very gritty and depressing and noir, but it's not overly depressing. It's not like, it is definitely depressing, but it definitely, like, the way that the story flows, it has like very satisfying moments that, it makes it all worth in the end. Somewhat, not fully obviously, but somewhat. And this has been a delight to come back to, because I don't mind this kind of storytelling. It's dark, but I wouldn't say it gets too dark. It could definitely get darker and more melodramatic, and it doesn't. This is kind of, I wouldn't say my kind of story, but it's definitely, when I'm in the mood for it, this is my kind of story. That's what I was meant to say. It's my 6 month, this will continue to be my 6 month rule for comics. And what I mean by that is every 6 months, I will come back, or less, I will come back and reread this phenomenal story, this phenomenal comic series. Creepshow was, out of all the little OGNs, original graphic novels, that's the ones that read all in one sitting, this one was the easiest to read all in one sitting. This is homage comics done right. Now, I don't know how faithful it is to EC Comics. I'm assuming it's very, because I've heard from everyone that has read this comic, and I want to see more Stephen King comics. We use some for Image, so kind of cool to see. But it proves that he's just as good a comic writer as he is a novel writer, as writing novels. And when I said novel writer, and I can't wait to watch the movie now. I'll definitely watch the movie when again on vacation. I'll watch the movie. I was going to, but there's so much I had to read, so it's like, nope, not so much, but just a lot more I had to read than I thought I did, I guess you could say. But this was just very good. Like, it's the best kind of homage story. I said it really, I had a really weird, I had a really good way of saying it the first time. I can't remember, but like, honestly, all these anthology books, all these stories, it's anthology. There's a bunch of stories in here, and all of them I liked. And it was that nice, like, classic horror comics feel to it, And it was just, if you're looking for a classic horror, yeah, I would say this is the perfect comic to read in October, around Halloween. Because it'll get you right into the spooky season mood. There we go, that's all I had to say. And last, and I hate to say it, but least, Hip Hop Family Tree. Now, originally I was going to review this one as its own separate video, and do its own separate video to commemorate Ed Piscor, but I couldn't finish this book. I got 20 pages in, and I just like, this is basically the same reasons for why I didn't like that, it was, what's his name? The David F. Walker Black Panther Party book. And that's, they tell a story. It's a biography, but they just tell you it. They don't really show you it. They show you it sometimes, and there's definitely a reason why it's a comic series. But I think Ed Piscor should have gone to the school of Eric Powell, because Eric Powell is the best. He did a historical comic book called Did You Hear What Eddie Gain Done? Probably my favorite comic I read in the year I read it in. That year I first read it in. And honestly, the second time I read it too. It's an absolutely fantastic comic. And it's a biography, so it's a biography of Eddie Gain's life. So it has sometimes summarized things, so you can tell it, so the author can tell everything they want to tell. But he does it in such a way that it keeps your interest. Even though it sometimes feels like it would be a lecture, it still is interesting. And maybe that's a huge bias because it's about a serial killer. Obviously, it's going to be more interesting than hip-hop, than the history of hip-hop. Something I'm not really all that into. But I've liked comics about things I'm not really into, like war comics. But this was not my cup of tea. But I will be checking out his Red Room, which seems to be more up my alley. And the other thing was, he just had a lot of dialogue. And Red Room seems to be a traditional comic, but this wasn't really traditional in my opinion. But that, as I say, is that. Definitely more satisfied with this cut.